that can go through the water.
Right.
I quote you on that?
Yeah, it's just a fact of the matter. It's like, anything higher than
that for a while?
the bottom of your door that entering your car. If the water's deeper than that, you don't drive it.
Well,
Simple
even
as
with
that.
that, you can run into holes
Well, that's all the other
Covered
things,
that way.
or you just get,
or run off the
name it.
road.
Really notice it, really.
She's a nurse, she should be smart enough to know that.
Oh,
She
is it busy
is
during your
smart
shift?
enough. She just is.
Good.
Really steady. I think it'll be
Well,
a good.
but there's a difference between
Yeah.
fear and reckless abandon, right?
I don't think, when we lived
long you gotta be in
in
that?
South Carolina, probably almost 4, turned our heads. She was beyond the
Was it just
breakers.
me, or were you guys like your
Going
legs
to-
and back a little?
She's lucky to be alive, then, I guess what you're telling us.
She jumped horses.
I went, I met a bunch of my friends for lunch
get out of there.
downtown, so I
Yeah,
took
she's
my
very
bike,
lucky to be
so.
alive
Yeah,
and
so
to
you're-
So if there was
everything.
anything going on, it would have stretched
She
my
probably
out.
hasn't seen
Yeah.
enough people in a bad enough way.
in Carolina?
Has.
Realize
Well,
how,
then, I don't get it.
different from the desk job. and
Yeah.
I consider myself
Yeah.
somewhat,
She's invincible.
not fearless, but certainly willing to take legitimate risks, but also not dumb.
And cleaning carpets
I think
too.
she just doesn't see the
Finally,
risk.
no humidity, so I can get that done.
Pizza or
Everything,
some other kind?
everything,
Is that what it is?
it looks like.
That's what I have.
We're gonna get that one back tomorrow,
Pizza though with no beer. Come on.
Good point.
About the same in terms of fat, isn't it?
Hey, Mike.
There's no fat in pizza. Don't you know that?
Not to worry about, right? Not something to worry about because
It's like birthday cake. No fat, no calories.
You know, my love of spreadsheets.
Doesn't count.
You and I may share that love.
Huh?
Spreadsheets, you and I may share
Guys
a
that
love.
just sat down.
That's right, yeah.
I believe that's Tom Yost.
When I saw that email this morning, it was a challenge.
Little light reading.
Boy.
Once more into the breach.
Digested in small bites, so. How'd you think of the bike presentation?
There's still way too many unanswered questions in my
I
estimation.
thought we were gonna get some alternatives.
Some kind of idea what this thing's gonna cost.
So does that mean Emily's gonna have an opponent in 2 years?
So how much really,
He tried this last year.
because we're not gonna get anywhere near what
I
the
did.
projection
He's
is.
tried
He's tried
multiple
a number of times. Done yet?
It's time to start.
Come on. Just turned 6 o'clock.
Well,
That's the clock we follow.
Yes.
All right.
Exactly 6.
Take it you're in a hurry? I will call the September 12th Finance Committee meeting to order. Bill, have you the roll?
I do.
Okay, so first item, budget, the overview of requested operating budget.
Yeah, I'll get this started. We just wanted to keep this brief because we have a lot of departments coming tonight, but we wanted to give you a little context of where all of the requests have come in for the general fund portion of the budget. So I have a handout at your places, and we're also going to be showing it on the screen. So if we look at all of the general fund budget, looking at the general fund revenues, right now we're estimating at just under $22 million in total revenue, 21,828, 937. There's a couple pieces from the state that we don't have yet, but that's our best estimate currently. And then we looked at the base budget. So this would be authorized positions at currently authorized wage rates and hours, current line items, but before decision items. And that totals $21,462,229. So an available amount beyond the base of $366,708. However, in the base budget, we don't have anything built in for our union settlements or cost of living yet. We have a personnel contingency, and the total personnel contingency for the general fund and the other general fund supported funds, which would be the library and the youth center, is in the budget at $356,869. And at this point, we still have open union negotiations for both police and EMS. Until we know that, we don't have a recommendation on non-union cost of living adjustment. And then the other item that would be funded out of that is if there are any compensation plan or merit adjustments. So we have an estimate in there. We're hoping that it's enough to cover all 4 of those items, but we won't know until the union negotiations are completed sometime later this fall. So one way to look at that, if we take just what's available and we subtract out our estimate of the contingency that's needed, that only leaves about $10,000 without either increasing other revenues or finding other places to reduce expenditures in the general fund budget.
And that does not include formalizing the public safety capital item.
That's correct. Yes. The next couple pages, and I won't go through every line on here, but I just wanted to pull out some of the key numbers. This next slide goes through some of the major general fund revenues, where we're estimating those and what the change is from the prior year. For the property tax levy limit, that assumes that we're going up to the full allowable increase in the limit. There is a possibility for the city to do an emergency adjustment to the levy limit for unreimbursed expenses related to the state declared disaster. At this point, we don't know what's going to be reimbursable yet, so we have not factored anything in for that at this point. And the reason why the increase in the general tax levy is only $78,000, which is less than in prior years, is because of the exemption of a class of personal property. So the way that's going to work is we will get a new aid payment from the state of about $295,000. That's what's shown on the next line. But we need to reduce our levy limit worksheet by that same dollar amount. So the two of those combined are basically equal to what our net new construction is, which is about 3%. Some of the state aids we know, some of them we won't have the actual number until mid-September to October 1st. But by the time we start meeting in October to go through budget scenarios, we should have those final numbers and we can update our revenue projections. This next slide is just a high-level look at what makes up the decision items. We have just over $1 million in decision items in the general fund. The vast majority of those are personnel. The first 2 items are the personnel contingency that I was talking about earlier for the general fund, and then the library and the youth center. General fund personnel decision items, which would be new positions or changes to positions, is about $415,000. And there's another $87,000 in personnel decision items in the library and the youth center. And then the net of all of the other non-personnel decision items is $154,000, which just brings us up to the total of $1 million. One thing that is factored into the base, because we have the amount known, is the health insurance plan increase, which was a 6% increase. And last year we had negotiated a maximum 6% increase, so we know that number would not be higher than that. So that's built in, and we know that there's no increase in the dental insurance rate.
If I can simplify this for everybody.
Oh, would you please, Mark?
Yeah,
We have $1 million in requests. We have
10,000.
$366,000 to spend.
That's right, unless we either find other revenues or other decreases in expenditures.
Could you explain that a little better?
Just want to make sure everybody's on the same page.
And then just the last slide in the overview here, at the last meeting, there was a request to have some information on what our general fund surplus has been the last couple of years and then projected. So in 2016, we had a net surplus of over $1.2 million. In 2017, after we factor out the planned use of fund balance related to the golf course and some of the replacement funds, our net available surplus was about $414,000. This year, we're projecting a deficit, and the reason for that deficit is the use of the emergency contingency. This is assuming that the full contingency of the 517,000 is used, and we have not factored in any potential reimbursement. So if FEMA comes in and we're able to get reimbursed, we may get a large piece of that back, but we don't know that at this point. So this projection just assumes that full 517 is used. If we were to take that out and just consider that separately, right now we're projecting a small surplus of about 164,000. So that's lower than what we've seen in prior years. I'm guessing that's probably a conservative number because I think the departments in putting their projections together often put in the budget amount if they don't know, even though they may not spend that in all cases. So it might be a little higher, but I think the point is we're not looking at large surpluses of the $1 million like we've seen in some prior years, and that does raise the issue of the funding for the fire, the EMS, and the sick accrual that we've been trying to fund with surplus.
So if we got reimbursed, we would still not be able to fund fire and EMS. Totally.
Based on this projection, and I'm expecting this number will go up somewhat, but I don't know if it'll go up enough to fully cover all of those items.
So we need to have a surplus of 250. Otherwise, have to put a line item in the budget to take care of the planned capital spending for these two items.
Right. If our goal is to have fund balance set aside for those items, if we don't have the surplus for it, we would need to build that into the budget. The other alternative would be to wait until those expenditures come up and then include that in our borrowing at that time.
But then, should we do that, that's less available
Certainly.
borrowing for other departments,
Correct.
right? Because
Yep.
we've imposed a $3.5 million cap on capital borrowing. That's our capital plan for the general fund. So we continue to try and put 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag with our spending here.
Would we be able to borrow for funds that won't be spent for?
Well,
No, what he's saying is that we would have no accumulated funds until we actually had to borrow for the truck or an EMS. But how much is a fire truck? How much does your ambulance cost?
The two that we're soon to buy, about 260,000 each, so.
So that takes our capital spending, when that happens, if we go this way, from 3.5 to 3.25.
Yep, that's correct. I'm just saying what the options are. If we don't have the surpluses, that is an option for us to borrow. That could squeeze out other borrowing if we want to stay within those targets. Or you can do a hybrid of both, of save what we're able to and then use borrowing to make up the difference. But either way, it's going to squeeze the budget on the operating or the capital side.
Just trying to paint the picture here, guys. Clearing your throat, or do you have something to say?
I was just wondering if you could explain that a little more in detail.
How stark do you want to hear it?
Well, I only have to look at the first page and it tells me all I need to know.
Okay. All right, so let's go. Municipal court. So that's the judge. Here come the judge.
Where do you want me?
There's a mic over there.
Good evening, I'm Marjorie Schuett. I'm the judge of the municipal court. My materials start on page 65. I only have one decision item totaling $4,263. The purpose of that is to increase the hours of a part-time clerk from 15 hours a week to 20 hours a week. Had 20 hours a week in the past. We've bounced back and forth between 15 and 20 hours for this position in the last 5 years. I'm asking to go back up to 20 hours a week at this time for two reasons. One, just as backup for my full-time clerk, but also due to the fact that since January of this year, we've been using the state collections, state debt collection, SDC, and it's been very successful, but obviously, the sooner you can get that information, the data entry on those who do owe for prior forfeitures, the more likely you're able to collect. Any questions? Great, thank you very much.
Rolling now.
Okay, so we'll approach this much we have in the past. So we got the two ends of our budget, both revenue and expense. So let's start with the easy stuff. That's the revenue side. I get to sound like a broken record, but every year at this point in time, I can just give you a year-to-date projection of how we believe we're going to be doing for 2018. Right now, it looks like, you know, we should be hitting ever so slightly above what our projected amount was for 2018 in revenue. And I just simply, as a starting point, carried that over into 2019. As usual, every time we get farther along in the year, we get some better numbers out there, and we can always entertain the idea of potential rate increases to achieve various revenue targets out there. But I have every reason to believe that just using that very conservative base amount for next year will be a strong number, and based on kind of continuous increasing call volume, it's likely to go up a little bit, but certainly it does provide you with some room to do that. Also note that our other revenue source, which is the income that comes from the townships, again, that has a built-in increase, small amount of another $3,000 next year. Not variable, but just looking forward, 2019 is the last year of that 5-year agreement. So somewhere in next year, we will have to sit down with the townships again and evaluate hopefully what that hopefully will look like into the future. So any questions on the revenue side?
Have you made plans, or have you looked at what a typical revenue increase would be based on what we've done in the previous years?
I haven't put the numbers together yet because it's really, at this point, I only have strong numbers through July. And to really be accurate about that, I'd like to have 9 months behind to start making those projections. Something we do every year, but I can't give you a hard number right now, but certainly as we go along.
Well, do you have the revenue increases from the last 2 years? Based on the
Pull that up.
price increases? Give us a ballpark of what is potentially there.
You know, I always kind of reiterate, ultimately, the formula, if you will, between dividing what the taxpayers pay and what users pay, the magic number that we've always been comfortable with in the past, somewhere is between a 60-40, 66-33 split, somewhere in that, 7%. We've always kind of hit that target pretty good. So that number goes forward, and you look at what our overall operational expense is, and you use that same formula. That's typically how we try to make the numbers work out.
Right.
So,
Just trying to get an idea of what we've done in the past.
yeah. If I knew that I could, but I do have a spreadsheet where I keep track of every year what our actual budget amounts were, what our actuals were, and what we did for all the rate increases and what it's actually meant for actual cash in the bank every year. So that's something I can put together for a future meeting.
Well, I think you should plan on doing the calculations for a rate increase.
Okay.
I understand your desire to get 9 months of actuals in before we do that. I'm just trying to get a sense of what the magnitude might be.
Yep. It's pretty much the route we go every year, so I'll use that same process, and I'll provide you with the exact same analysis we've done in previous years.
To answer your question, last year, in the scenario, the item was an extra $6,700 roughly.
Okay.
We increased it for the rates.
Not helping us fill that bucket up.
Except, yeah, 6,700 that we, from the increase in the rates.
Okay.
Okay, so if no other questions on revenue, then we'll start looking at the expense side. Percentage. Obviously, personnel, Bill already filled you in that, the numbers that are in here for personnel costs are status quo numbers.
Steve, do you want to just do the decision items?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm all about that, so, all right, not that many in there, so, we'll start, number one is medical supplies, and again, I keep sounding like a broken record, but, we're at the mercy of, the cost of the, particularly pharmaceuticals that get dealt to us every year. They keep going up and up and up, and, we could reach the point with this, looking at the history out there, we need to add, another $3,000 that would go from 33 up to 36.
This is straight pass-through, though, pretty much a straight pass-through. I understand the revenue formula from reimbursements and stuff.
I can't say that every nickel of what, we would increase, that is gonna come back to you in revenue, and I'll give you the example that we gave in our budget review meeting. Our biggest single source of added expense in pharmaceuticals right now is the opiate overdose antidote, which is Narcan. And I'll give you a quick illustration. 15 years ago, a single dose of that, which is a small amount, you could buy it for $7. Now, it's 10 times that cost. Make it worse, the potency of the things that are out there on the street right now, far greater. So a single individual can't be revived with one dose. Sometimes it takes 6 or 8 doses, sometimes more. So before we do anything else on a typical opiate overdose, we may be $500 to $600 into just on pharmaceutical costs alone. Now, if that gets reimbursed through their insurance, great. But I don't want to stereotype a lot of those patients, but some of them spend every nickel they have to get the drug that they're abusing. They don't necessarily have the means to pay our bill, so.
Are you marking up the drug costs at all?
Sure. Cost plus 50%.
Okay.
So anyways, that's the kind of the nature of the business that we're in. But moving on, outside services, which is really our billing company, and we steadily increases every year because as revenue increases, the percent that we pay, or not the percent, but the actual net dollars we pay to the billing company goes up, of course, offset by revenue as well. Building and grounds maintenance, that has not changed a lot in several years, but if you kind of look over the years, even though we had the $12,000 figure there, you can see that creeping up just because a lot of the routine things that we pay for, everything from HVAC system maintenance to sprinkler inspections, fire alarm system inspections, all the other cleaning supplies and stuff go up, so we ask you to increase that by $1,000. Good news, on the utility side, because we're now reaching to the point where we have our LED project, we'd like to cut that down by $1,300 in anticipation of achieving some savings there. And then the last item, which really talks about, in the way this sits in the budget item here, just understand that the last one is called to reserve for ambulance replacement. And this essentially is reflected in the operational budget because it has to get factored in how we divvy up costs with the townships. We want to accurately reflect what we set aside out there. So we will be, in the future monthly replacing orders for our 2 replacement ambulances. We know going forward we need to up that so that the next 8 years later, when we need to replace those again, that should be the amount we should be looking to reserve. Now this, technically is funded in a different way, but I also want to say from the discussion you had before, we have built up, and I believe the last time I checked, we've got about $384,000 sitting right now in the reserve. So when we buy these 2 ambulances at $520,000 for those, we've got a good chunk of that already there, and actually doesn't account for what would be typically set aside at the end of this year. We should have had, if everything goes right, $480,000 set aside at the end of this year when those ambulances are going to have to be paid for. So, but like anything else,
did you say the current value of the two ambulance replacements are?
The cost,
Right.
about 260 each, so.
Well, why did you come up with 580? So it's 520 you're looking for?
Yeah, did I say something else?
Thought so.
No, 520,
So-
sorry.
And those have an 8-year life?
By the time we get to that point, yes, 8. The current ones right now, 10 years is what we're gonna get out of them. But they should have been replaced already, but we kind of stretched them out a little bit longer. But as we get busier, and over the next 8 years, I expect our call volumes to continue to go, and probably not gonna get 10 years out of them, so.
That works out to 65 a year.
What's that?
That works out to 65 a year.
Not 60, so that number needs to be 17, right? You were doing 48,
Right.
you need 65 a year to buy them next year. So we need to add inflation to that 520, 3% a year.
Yeah,
So the reality is that you're not gonna be able to replace those in 8 years for 520. It's gonna be what, 560, 575? So that reserve needs to go up even higher.
correct, and it's really up to, I guess, all of you to decide how you want to do that. You can just incrementally change it every year, you can pick a target amount and leave it level over the 10 years.
What's the 2.5?
As long as you, in the long
Interest
run,
earning.
come up with whatever your 8-10-year projection
That's
is,
setting aside interest, that's part of our general.
more than one way to arrive at that.
So Bill, it looks to me like that number needs to be closer to 70 grand a year.
But Mark, what is the residual value of those two?
Those,
Do you have how much
I,
would,
I think the issue is that when you trade those things in, your net price is still 520. You're not gonna, there's no residual value
Yeah,
for those
it's
boxes.
exactly it. I'll tell you that right now.
If you could get $1,000 for them, I think you'd be lucky. You might sell them to Hertz Donuts and have them
Yeah.
do another ambulance.
Those current ambulances right now have little to no value. And one of the primary reasons is the chassis that's under that engine that Ford put in that is a huge known problematic. No one wants them. Those 6-liter diesel engines in there are they're dogs, and no one will pay you anything for them, so.
thank you.
Is that what I saw on a flatbed trailer last Friday afternoon heading north?
Yep, I got one right now that's in the shop, but no, the two that have gotten towed out lately, that's due to our flood damage, so.
Oh, what'd you say?
What's
Is
that?
FEMA gonna pay for this now?
Well, we've got comprehensive.
The flood's covered by insurance
So,
for the vehicle damage.
vehicle insurance, that's comprehensive.
So repair, not replacement.
What's that?
Repair, not replacement.
Oh, yeah, right, they're not total, but, so.
Can we send them to South Carolina pretty quickly?
Set them out on the belt line.
That wouldn't help us, because if we had the total amount, we'd be in a real world of hurt trying to
I,
provide service.
yeah.
Anyways, any other questions regarding, the overview of,
Yeah, does your roof leak too?
Yeah, we talked about that last time. We've got some roof leaks that we've taken care of, but like I said, it uncovered some unfortunate, I would call, corner cutting by people who built our building, and we're keeping up on it, but
So $1,000 increase is gonna take care of that?
yeah, I'm guessing right now, we already hit most of them right now. What they're saying is, going forward, there are possibilities that those failures can continue. They can't say for certainty, but be prepared that every one of those roof penetrations with what they call the Fernco fittings in there, which is a rubber gasket that's put on there, they're deteriorating. And so, to fix the 3 leaks that we had, it was about $1,800. So, right now, every roof is dry, but
But that building is, what, 10 years old or?
Yeah.
Standard.
Hmm.
Welcome to the world of putting projects out for bid and letting the general contractor,
You take the
get
lowest
people
bidder.
to give them their best price. They're gonna come in, when they're on the hook for, the warranty and building, once the 5 years have passed, they're off the hook, and we're the owner.
Okay. Else?
All right?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Steve?
IT.
What page are you on?
69.
Hey, before Drew gets started, I just want to give him a shout out for really work he's been doing to try to keep things afloat with Todd on medical leave. It's been incredible. And he's been really hustling to do that, and I just want to express my appreciation. And, there's a lot of things that we're not able to catch up with right now, but he is keeping the most important things on the front burner, so I just thought you should know that.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you, everybody. Real quick, just with any of these, as I was going through the process, some of the things I was just trying to do was align our budget more closely with some of the support contracts that we had outstanding out there that weren't incorporated into previous budgets. And not an excuse, but with my director's departure, I had 4 days to kind of put this together, so if I did miss something, I do apologize. First item I want to talk about, IT department submitting request to create an information technician 2 position. Basically, our help desk technician, Dave Tolman, has been with the city over 8 years, and over those 8 years, he's been taking on additional responsibilities. Most specifically, recently, he's been looking at taking over the security systems for the police department. He was the project manager on that last year. He's also going to be continuing with our surveillance systems and security systems with the Parks and Recs department, and he's also going to be looking at continuing that with the senior center as well too. It's kind of a unique skill set. It's not something that's typically specific to IT, but he's kind of jumped on board and accepted those additional responsibilities. So that's kind of along the lines with the justification.
We're not shy, we'll let you know.
Okay, sounds good. I will move on then. Along with that, we have a request to move the funding for an IT intern position. Currently, that position was created to perform GIS functions during the summer months. The intern that we currently have has indicated a desire to continue working with us, but the funding that was provided for it was through TIF because it was GIS that they were focusing on. And we'd like to kind of transition him over into an intern position that's more general in the IT field. He's been instrumental with us with our short staffing right now with assisting at the police department, handling some help desk concerns and everything over there. And we'd just like to continue that program, but I just feel it's more appropriate if we move it out of TIF funding and align it with, personnel as far as the funding for it. Next request, the iWork annual support contract for building inspection software. This was software that was approved for purchase in 2018. All this is allowing us to pay the cost of the software itself on for the annual basis and the support that goes along with it. over to Toughbook one and talk about the on-base. The on-base is the exact same rationale behind it. It's support costs and also the software cost, licensing for it. For the Toughbook laptop fleet replacement, this is, again, something I decided that we needed to get it aligned properly. Previously, there had always been a discussion between whether it was going to be funded through MPS, ISC, or the IT department, and every year seemed like it just, sometimes we'd be able to fund the money one way, or sometimes fund the money another way. It just didn't really make much sense as far as, it's all the money's coming out of the basic, general fund. We just wanted to align it better with IT, so we had that money allocated instead of trying to go to the police department and see if they had additional monies for Toughbook replacements or not. In addition to that, we've been trying to repurpose the police department's Toughbook themselves and provide it to our streets and water utility fleet. However, those are getting very long in the tooth. Typically, we have a 3-year replacement plan for our Toughbooks. A lot of those are hand-me-downs from the police department that have been in place for 6+ years. So, and the water utility folks and the streets folks use that for accessing GIS. They're going out to a site, they have a main break, they need to immediately access that information as far as where it is. For an issue along that line, and that's what we're providing to them. That has grown exponentially as their fleet has grown. So we're requesting that currently right now we have 24 Toughbooks that are in circulation. Out of those 24 Toughbooks, 10 of them are assigned to the police department and 14 are used in different capacities throughout the city. The Municipal Operations Center, building inspection, code compliance officer, the recycling center even is utilizing one of those Toughbooks. What we'd like to do is allocate enough monies to replace 6 of them per year, which would allow us to replace 4 for the police department, which would continue with our 3-year rotation for them, and then an additional 2 for the rest of the fleet. And then after we make those 6 replacements, then we would try to get the best left over and repurpose them as well too. So we're constantly trying to refresh those Toughbooks to keep repurposing them. So I like this one. The last item is is increasing the amount for entering into a maintenance and monitoring agreement with a vendor for our network infrastructure. Currently, right now, we have a lot of issues that seem to crop up. You guys, some of you have experienced it even here with Wi-Fi. We also are having issues as far as network equipment being monitored during off hours, also being able to patch the switches and routers to make sure they're current and secure. I just had a meeting with a network consultant, and we have some equipment that's 15 years old. We need to identify that. We need to take steps to look at a replacement plan for that, and basically overall, get a good assessment as far as where we stand with our networking equipment and providing support to city personnel. So we can't have Wi-Fi failing or networks failing and not have proper redundancies in place. And being able to secure this vendor and their expertise will allow us, one, to have them monitoring our system, make sure it's all patched and secured, but 2, making us know where our shortfalls are and what we need to do to improve it. Yes, Green.
So are we going to keep Windows 7 or are we planning to upgrade them?
No, we're actually currently this year in the process of upgrading to Windows 10. We have a couple of pilot testing going on with the police department to just make sure a lot of our proprietary software is going to function correctly with Windows 10, and we don't need to contact our vendors in order to tweak things. to make sure it's running properly. After we do that, we have a planned rollout with the police department to upgrade their squad fleet. Once that is concluded, then we're going to go ahead and roll it out for the rest of the police department, kind of take a step back, make sure everything's running properly, we don't have any issues, and then look at the rest of the city for next calendar year.
What's your oldest piece of hardware down there?
I have a switch that's 15 years old.
Switch?
So, yeah, older than my son. So.
And you got a switch on the shelf down there in case that one goes belly up.
Sure. Yes, we do. Depending
Sure
on
meaning yes you do, or
Yes,
sure
yes,
meaning
yes,
you
we
wish
have
you
switches
did?
In place. I will just freely admit, I'm not in a position to readily identify the replacements that my boss has in place for those. I just don't want to speak out of turn.
Well, your network infrastructure consultant should be telling you what you need to get rid of and what you
Yep.
need to,
And
and when,
that's-
put you on a schedule.
Right, and that's the intent of this, by securing the vendor and having to monitor our equipment and also make recommendations as far as equipment that needs to be.
We don't have that consultant on board currently.
I have retained the services of a consulting group. They are assisting me right now in Todd's absence.
That's temporary, right?
That is temporary. I have not gotten into an actual agreement with them. This is more of a feeling out stage. They have to offer their needs. See if we long-term wise want to continue with them or look at evaluating services from someone else.
How long do you think you're gonna continue to roll the dice
For,
managing your network that way?
I don't. That is why I'm approaching the council, asking for additional funds and to be able to make a determination of what needs to be done as far as.
Well, having spent way too many years in that business, that's absurd to have equipment that's old, that's supporting your infrastructure.
I don't disagree with that.
I think the city ought to wake up and just understand that when it goes belly up, there it sits.
Again, Howard, I don't disagree with that statement.
Todd and I have had this discussion. About every year we have this discussion.
No,
Usually out in front of City Hall.
And that's great, and all I will say is, I'm not Todd, I have a different direction I would like to see things done, but that is all I will say. Does anybody else have any questions? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Drew.
Thanks, Drew.
Library is at 173.
173.
Library?
You were ready for me and I wasn't.
A switch, that's 50.
So I just wanted to start off by, first of all, talking a little bit about the Dane County tax exemption and how that's affecting this year's decision items. So every state in the US funds public libraries differently. And in the state of Wisconsin, specifically under state statute 43.642, municipalities with public libraries may be exempt from the county library tax if they appropriate locally in the amount above the defined minimum. In order to determine if a municipality may request an exemption from the county library tax for the following year, there's a set of 5 different calculations that the county does. So with the recent subtraction from the 10th district, it was that's affected the formulas to the effect of approximately $92,000. So in order to remain exempt from the county tax, which we then receive $876,427 by remaining exempt, we have to increase our minimum allocation as a municipality by $92,000 plus.
this transfer in fund, that's where that number is identified in the city budget.
So, the timing on this is unfortunate, because the county doesn't put forth the municipal valuations until August 15th. And so by that time, most municipalities are already underway with their budgets. So what that translates into as a bottom line is that we increase the allocation by the minimum, or we lose the exemption, therefore almost half of the funding. So I understand completely the position that the finance committee is in, where this could really feel like a forced decision. Because as you can see with the decision items, if we take out the first request, which is the additional librarian fund, the full FTE, along with the insurance cost, what we were originally asking for in terms of an increase in operating was less than $8,000. So as an organization, we've really reached a point where we're pretty maxed out on our operating budget. We have slight increases due to system costs and agreements. We have slight increases due to things like copier maintenance lease agreements. But for the most part, we're not gonna really need more than our annual budget that has been the same for office supplies. And our utilities costs, now that we've installed the LEDs, are going down. Staff continues to find ways to utilize friends funding for things that could have potentially come out of the operating budget. So in order to meet that minimum, we've put together, and thanks to Vanessa for really doing this at the last minute, we put together with the board's recommendation, and the board did, even though they approved the budget previous to this, we did look at this last night, and they approved this as a recommendation with these decision items. So bumping back to chapter 43 really quick, it does indicate in the state laws that once the budget is allocated, because the library board is a governing board, not an advisory board, the budget is under the full authority of the library trustees to manage. But before then, it is under the jurisdiction of the municipality to allocate that. And then the trustees, in good trust of the community and taxpayer and council's will spend that as appropriated. So this is purely a recommendation. In talking with the Dane County Library Director, Tracy Herold, we have several options on how to allocate this. We could go personnel, capital, or operating. It just has to be the full total of the allocation. So this is what the board is recommending, along with myself and the finance team. So at this point, does anyone have any questions?
So Jocelyn, it's a one-time thing and it happened because of that F3 thing?
It's not a one-time thing, it is an increase here on out. So
It's a base builder.
No, I mean, it will be, but it's not, it happened because of our subtracting the money from TIF 3 and partially.
It is a formula that's looked at every year, so every year we would get some feedback on what that allocation has to be to qualify for that exemption. So it's something that you would receive in about July each year.
No, August 15th.
15th
Yep.
each year.
Yeah. So every municipality in Dane County goes through this. For example, Verona just had to increase their allocation to the public library by $300,000. Now, because they're in the position where they're paying off debt service, they've chose to allocate that to this debt service and then eventually phase that into personnel, capital, and operating into that base amount. The reason for this law, which was originally enacted in 1971, is two main reasons. And the first being that so anybody can't just throw up a shack and call it a library and be exempt from the Dane County tax. And the second reason is really a reason of equity, and that's so that all county libraries are growing in their operating budgets fairly exponentially altogether, so that we don't have one community that's increased their population by 50,000, but yet is remaining at an operating budget way below a community that may have a lesser population but operating at a much higher budget. So those are the two main reasons.
So would it be fair to say that it's like a maintenance of effort type of payment?
Yes.
If I could, I just wanted to give an explanation on the insurance to explain what we looked at there. A couple years ago, when the city established the risk management fund, we allocated a portion of our insurance costs to funds that had their own revenue sources like tourism and the enterprise funds. We didn't do an allocation for library at that time because the library is supported by the general fund. So we thought, well, we'd be charging the library and then we would just be increasing what the general fund is paying to the library. However, now understanding this formula and the importance of that, we've gone through and done the calculations to allocate what the library's share of our insurance would be based on their staffing and their facility and their insured items. And we came up with the amount of about $22,000. So that's included in the requested budget, and that helps count towards that $92,000 that needs to be made up on the formula, because we would be charging that insurance risk allocation fund to the library, and that would also count as the general fund support to the library, so that would help partially address this issue.
You also have a corresponding decrease to the general fund's expense as well, don't you?
Right, we are, overall, we're seeing an increase in our insurance and risk management costs, although the general fund amount, we're not requesting an increase there. So this is basically help us cover the additional costs that we're projecting. And we can go through the risk.
If I had $100 last year and I didn't charge the library 22, my bill this year is still going to be $100. Now the general fund only has to pay 80. Is that
what
we're trying to say?
What I'm
They
saying
went
is
up
based on our
122.
premiums, we paid 100 last year, we're paying 120 this
Right.
year. We're getting 20 from the library, so the general fund's still paying 100.
Any other questions? I just want to kind of go through the decision items real quick. Periodicals is all our print subscriptions. These are still very popular with the community, although I shouldn't say most, a variety of different vendors are phasing out print materials and going digital. Link services, this 310 account relates to our South Central Library System membership agreement. 330 account, electronic resources, this is a collective purchasing that we do. Every July, the library directors have a meeting where they vote on different services with a weighted vote. And that vote then translates into what our member costs will be for electronic databases and resources. Building grounds and maintenance, we'll need to work on some of the Hubbard Avenue side of the building, especially next year. Our copier lease agreement is with Gordon Flesh, that's increasing. We also see somewhat of a revenue increase for that. So on the revenues for the last 3 or 4 years, you can also see that we're increasing our expected revenue for the service. And we're hoping that that increase in revenue will always match the cost for that. Insurance bill just explained, the programming line. This is a little bit misleading just because of the account title. The 490 account is basically a contract account that we use to hire our media maker specialist to do all of our technology programs for young adults and young kids. So we would like to take that $10,000 budget and basically close out that budget line and allocate that towards the FTE position. So we're taking some out of our operating fund to contribute to that. The capital outlay we discussed last meeting, and then the personnel contingency is just as everyone else. Were there any questions on the decision items? Ideally, I'll just close with this. As we look towards and anticipate increases in valuations and would like to remain tax exempt, at the next council meeting on the agenda will be the resolution for the Dane County Tax Service. But I would also like to start guiding us in the direction of really, if we're gonna be mandated to have to increase our operating budget, how can we leverage that to the success of other city departments? So for example, if we're gonna be hiring a new FTE, how can that FTE be used in relation to other city departments? For example, the library that I worked at in Colorado Springs had a senior services librarian. So how can we hire for positions like that that can also then be used to the advantage of other city departments? We're not quite there strategically or with our mission and vision and long-term plan yet to really be talking about those things, but that's the kind of leadership that I would like to take the library and moving forward.
Thank you. I think our new senior director was on the same page with that, so that's really, really, really good to hear.
Bill, can you go back to your budget summary? I just want you to clarify, on page 2, the personnel contingency, what's in there again?
That would include costs for the 2 collective bargaining agreements, potential cost of living adjustments for non-union staff, and any compensation plan or merit adjustments. And how that breaks out, we won't really know until we settle the union contracts. We've made our best guess at what the cost may be to do those 4 items.
If I could add to that, it does include the funds that are supported by the general fund. So, the personnel contingencies that are in, I'm sorry, that were in the library were shown as a part of that, total $92,000 request.
But
So
there's,
that's the final item.
but there's no additional headcount in here.
That's right. That 356 does not include adding positions.
How much of that is cost of living?
Well, I would say most of that is cost of living. We didn't want to identify a specific breakdown since we're still in negotiations with the unions, at least in open session.
But it does include adjustments to health insurance?
It's not in there?
No, it does not have anything to do with health insurance.
But if people are trying to change titles or promotional increases or adjustments that way, that's in there?
We've made our best to estimate at the cost for those items. At this point, since we don't know what the union contracts are going to settle at, I think those would be first, as we'll see where those settle. And then typically the city has provided an equivalent cost of living adjustment to non-union employees. So we would add those up and then see what amount is remaining. If there's an amount remaining, that would be a potential pool of funds to look at compensation plan adjustments.
But the decision items that we're seeing for those grade increases are not accounted for in that line item, or
Right.
that line that you have.
Right. Can you go to the decision item page? So this page, page 4 in the packet, shows what makes up the total of the $1 million of decision items.
Yeah.
So the first 2 line items are the personnel contingency. Requests for new positions or adding hours to positions are what's shown in the next 2 lines
Okay.
after that.
Great, thank you.
So going back to what we just saw from Drew was about $60,000 in non-personnel. Where did you put that 92 or that 72 for the library? Is that included in that non-personnel decision item that?
Well, it was mostly
Well,
personnel,
the
so.
library position is included in the general fund supported personnel decision items line, the 86,900. That position represents the majority of that number. And the library's personnel contingency is in the second line, and that's also the large amount of that.
Right, but
The other
you've-
is just the small
but
amount
you've
for the
got-
center.
Say for the sake of argument, they're required to increase their we're required to increase their funding by 90.
Mhm.
And you're offsetting it by the cost allocation for insurance. So that says that you're increasing their costs outside of personnel by at least 70 grand. On top of the 50, there you're now at 120. So is that saying that the rest of the city only has $30,000 in non-personnel decision items?
No, the library position doesn't affect the non-personnel
I'm
decision
talking
items.
about that. What we're
I
saying,
guess I'm not following the question then.
What we
I
s-
am not either.
what we said was that the library needs $90,000 in additional funding.
But they put that in personnel, so that's
You're-
what that is accounted for
You're
there.
saying that it's all in personnel?
Well, most of it.
Most of it.
Out of the
Big chunk of it.
92,000, the insurance covers about 22, so that brings us to 70. And the position, I think, would account for the 70. I mean, it's roughly that amount.
It's about 70 of that
So
86.
we'll go the other way. Forget the library. Drew has identified approximately 50-some thousand dollars of increases just for him. For non-personnel stuff. Are we then saying that the rest of the city only has $100,000 in non-personnel cost increases? that what we're
I'd say
gonna
that
find?
IT was the largest department for non-personnel line item increases. And in some departments, there's offsets for items that they have increased. So, yeah, I would say that's correct, that IT is one of the largest sources of that 150,000 in non-personnel decision items. And we are planning, as we've done in the past, that after we go through these department meetings, that we'll be putting together some scenarios. So we will do our best for that first meeting in October to try to give you a scenario of what a balanced budget could look like. You may go in a completely different direction, but I think that'll help put it in kind of perspective of what kind of adjustments we would need to accomplish some of these things that we feel like we really need to try to fit into the budget.
Why the suspense? Why aren't we looking at that now?
Well, typically the process has been to have the departments present their requests and not ask for a recommended budget at the start, and we've been doing budget scenarios. I think
can-
if there's interest in doing a recommended budget and work off that, we could certainly accommodate that.
My take on it is it just seems to me that we're so far underwater here that we're just killing time here. Why don't you just come back with a recommended budget? We have $300,000 to spend, and you've got at least $1 million in items that you want to layer on the budget. Why are we messing around with $700,000? Why don't you just come back to us and say, here's our best offer that we can do, and anything other than this is going to require really some pencil sharpening.
The short answer to that is the council has never asked for that
And that.
before. It's not to say that you couldn't, but in my 20 years, the council has never asked us to come up with a recommended budget. We've gone through the.
Has the
finance-
council ever faced the finances that look like this
Yes,
in the last 20 years?
Worse.
yes.
Probably worse in
2008.
2008, 2009.
It hasn't in the 8
When we
years that I've been on the
instituted
council.
Cost recovery
Yeah.
for TIF, that was a major difference. Major. That was about 9 years ago.
Yeah, I think different communities do it differently. In some cases, the mayor, in some places, the administrator and staff put together a recommended budget, and then you work off that as a starting point. My understanding is Middleton and its policies and its ordinance has set it up that the departments request the budget, and then at that point, we start discussion. So we've been trying to provide scenarios to help guide that discussion. If you'd like to change the process, we're happy to look at scenarios on the front end, but we're trying to follow the process that's been outlined in previous
Right,
years.
the ordinance actually specifies the finance committee.
Yeah, no, I do
Follow
not
that.
think we should change that process. I think it is our obligation and our responsibility to figure that out. I don't think we want to allocate that to staff to do.
Yeah, in defense of that, how do you know the needs without actually hearing from the staff?
I think that's why the ordinance is there, because
Having the
it,
ability to
yeah.
ask questions and derive what you think is the most important. I mean, you can read it, and sometimes you don't get all the information you need from just.
I would argue that that under the current state statutes that we have, needs are somewhat irrelevant if the funds aren't available.
Mark, I understand your point.
On page 22 is where we're kind of guiding to for the budget development process, and that's the ordinance that we've been following in terms of what we move forward.
I understand your point, and that if the rest of the finance committee, a majority of the finance committee agrees with you, then recommend that to the council. You'd recommend that to them.
That's how Madison does it.
Right.
They just say, okay, Mayor, get on such and such a date, plop a budget down in front of
Right.
us, and
Sometimes the council tells the
we'll
mayor.
get out
to
the
apply it
scissors.
right.
Yep. Just a different way to do it. We've never done it that way.
Right. Actually, the system I came from in Indiana, the mayor recommended the budget, and the council could only cut it. That was by law, just like this is by ordinance.
Bring along.
Frustration.
We could, if you want to shorten the process, have each department head come up and then and just say, do you have any questions?
Need the presentation, since we just got the budget books.
Right, well, at least two of you think that, so. What do you think, Howard?
What do I think? I think we should continue with the process.
That's three of you then.
Don't switch canoes in the middle of the river.
Mark, you raise a good point, but you're outnumbered.
I just think that given the numbers, that people should not expect to get what they're asking for.
Yeah,
I
that's probably true.
can't
No,
speak for all the department heads or anybody else, but I can't imagine that anybody that's been sniffing around City Hall for the last few months, that understands the budget, that understands the funding, understands the expenditures and the revenues that we got, can think that they're gonna get a whole potload of money this year. I cannot believe anybody comes to that conclusion.
And I
It-
don't
it's
think
just-
anybody has.
I wouldn't even start that way.
You know, all of this probably leads us to the discussion eventually of, are you willing to find a new revenue source or not? And then, another question is, do we need the meeting on October 10th to prioritize personnel requests?
That may be an easy answer.
Well, let's just keep going. We're kind of
Yeah,
wasting
well-
time just talking about process.
Everybody sitting here understands
Yep.
we just don't have a big checkbook.
But I think it's important to understand what the needs are for future years going forward, even though we probably can't do anything about them. Certainly not this year.
I equate it to something, and I'm gonna pick on Drew, because IT is probably one of the most, if not the most important thing that you've got running for you in this place, as in every business. Your business will collapse if that is not done. Now, government doesn't necessarily run like a business, but it
No,
will
but
collapse
it
if
will
you don't.
collapse too.
So I'm sensitive to that because I know what happens when it does.
Thank you, Howard.
I would just add real briefly, in conversations that we've had at staff meetings, I think the staff has very clearly gotten the message that there's not a lot of funds this year. And I think that a lot of them feel that it's still important to address what the future needs are so that you're aware of them. Part of what we were trying to do with the budget kickoff meeting back in July, I believe it was to lay out that we knew that this is going to be a tight year, and not just this year, but with the way levy limits are structured and the state aids, this is going to be the reality for the next few years going forward. And that's why we need to decide, given what we're hearing from the needs from the departments, do we look at alternative revenue sources or potentially a referendum at some point down the road? Or if that is not on the table, do we reprioritize how we're spending our money currently? Because we don't have a lot of latitude between state aids and levy limits.
Well, I have two questions. We are getting about $69,000 more from the transportation. Is that all accounted for here? And the second is, where is that money which we are getting from the golf for $400,000? Is that also in here or not yet?
First question was about interest income?
No,
Or- I'm
no,
so-
we are getting
Oh.
$69,000 or about $100,000 more for the roads from the state. I was going through this budgets. I think it is 1.1 million which we are getting, and last year we got 1.069. So is that
The
money?
state general transportation aid numbers have not been released yet for next year.
Okay.
So I thought that we had built that in as the same dollar amount going forward until we.
Right, you have
see
a
if
zero
there's an
there
increase.
because you don't know the
Yeah.
exact number yet, yep.
That's a pipe dream until somebody puts it in
They
writing.
can't find 45 million, so I don't know what they're gonna do with some of the others.
As far as the 400,000 from the Gulf, when repayments are, of the advances are started in 2019, that is not counted as a revenue in the general fund. That would provide 400,000 that would go in our fund balance that's currently labeled as non-spendable. That becomes spendable fund balance. That might be an opportunity to look at things like the sick accrual or the capital reserves of using that fund to build up our assigned fund balance for those types of purposes. But that's not factored into the numbers we went through earlier
Okay, so
tonight.
that's not here yet. Okay, thank you.
All right, let's continue.
It's up on the chopping block next.
Building inspection, and they're on page 105.
Don't you like being the next person after that kind of discussion, Bill?
The good news is that for non-personal decision items, we're only asking $2,500, which is something that we've been paying anyway due to the increase of our online permitting process, paying fees for credit cards. We're getting charged a percentage from these credit cards for the convenience of the customers. In the past, we've been paying it, but we've been under budget on our projections, so we upped the amount to be more consistent with what we paid the last 2 years.
But those are, you said, so those are offset by pass-through expenses, pass-through fees to the customer?
Right. Well, they're part of the,
So it's a zero impact on your budget.
Well,
No,
it's-
this is our administrative costs of running the credit card programs. So that account has been underfunded for a number of years. So this is bringing it up to the level that it's actually being paid. So it's not a pass-through directly to customers. They don't pay the percentage. We have to pay a percentage to keep that infrastructure in place for running the credit cards and allowing that option for customers.
Can't you build that into your fees, though?
Fees?
Why don't you raise your
we
fees?
can, yeah, we can increase our fees. I mean, it's,
Increase your fees to cover your
Yeah.
costs, everybody else does.
and,
$1,000.
Is there, are there other city departments that do the same thing, that are gonna have the same thing?
I think
Occur
you
to
should
them?
look into to getting at such that there's no impact.
Yeah.
Right, we shouldn't-
well, we can increase the fees so we can make up to several million if you want us to.
Let's do that.
I don't know how your users are gonna appreciate it. But, I can do an analysis, it's not gonna happen anytime until after we get over the flood disaster, obviously, but, I can try to put something together in the future as far as, I think we're pretty similar to other municipalities, in our fee structure that we're charging for typical building processes, if you will. Some applications were a little higher than others, some applications were a little lower, but I think it's what they had put together years ago works well, and I think
Would be something we'd probably look at from a citywide standpoint. This is one of the 2 credit card vendors that we use. The fee structure, the administrative cost of doing that. When this was put in place many years ago, the decision was to have those administrative costs put towards the city. We can reach out to that credit card vendor and see if there is an ability to have that be a pass-through. Other credit card vendors that we use, it is a pass-through. That decision was made many years ago. It hasn't been addressed since that point.
When
So
you
we'll-
renew your license plate from the state,
Yeah.
it's a third-party pass-through.
Well, I understand the concept, I'm just saying.
Yeah,
that
well, I
it was
think you
put in
should-
place many years ago, the decision was to keep the administrative costs for
What?
the city. We can re-examine that.
Why do you think we ought to keep losing money on this?
I'm not making that recommendation.
Okay?
This is a.
Let's
Trying to catch up to
let's
where the
change
budget
it.
was, so we can certainly go back and look at that.
So we've got two vendors that might fall in the same category?
We have two vendors, one, the pass-through exists to the customer. This is one that was put in place many years ago. At the time it was put in place, the decision was made to have administrative costs covered by the city.
Okay.
So we can re-examine that arrangement.
There, Bill, I just saved you 10 grand so far tonight. Not saved. At 10 grand is the bottom line. All right, what's next?
The other item is the part-time, expanding the hours to share between two people. Right now, Mikkel has been doing a great job. However, in order to maintain a non-full-time status and with the amount of work and items that are required for things from the city's municipal buildings, and with the increase in parking enforcement, we've run into some issues as far as projecting this to be a split between two people. The extra increase for the $10,000 is for the second part-time guy, the 30-hour split between the two people to maintain buildings and do parking enforcement.
What would happen if you took parking enforcement off the table? This is the
some
downtown
money.
parking enforcement, right? If you took that off the table, would you need the extra hours?
Currently, Mikkel is been limited on his downtown enforcement. The direction was during construction of the downtown to limit the amount of enforcement, however, keep it viable for the businesses. So that's basically what he's been concentrating on, and he does it very minimal, part-time, lets people know he's there. As far as the hours used, I would say for short term, that's probably fine. I mean, I think we could get by with the ability of just the one.
Wasn't TIF paying for some of this originally?
No.
Or maybe it was the CDC? No, Community
Well,
Development?
the CDA is paying currently for snow removal for our downtown city properties. When Mark Goad left, he was full-time, and he came in on the weekends. He flexed his time, but he came in on the weekends and evenings and plowed snow. Well, with a part-time guy, we don't have that flexibility to do that. So I went to the CDA to ask for that to be in their budget to cover those properties. Sean Stowski actually has a decision item in his budget to bring that to the general fund. This year may not be the year to do that, but that's one of the things the CDA currently is subsidizing for the general fund. But parking enforcement is not one of those things. And the concern with parking enforcement is really gonna be when that second building is built downtown, do they park in their assigned stalls underground, or do they park on the street, thereby compounding the perceived parking problem downtown? And we may need to, and I know Terrence Wall told all of you that he'll enforce it, but I don't believe that for a minute, that they privately can enforce that effectively.
Did he tell you how he was
He
going?
told you that.
He was going to, did he tell you how he was going to enforce it?
He told you in a public meeting that he would enforce it with his
But
management.
do we know how he's going to do
How
it?
he's going to do that? And do you think I believe every word he utters?
No, but I told you at the time, I didn't think he'd be able to do it, and I still don't think that.
Thank you. So at some point in time, when the construction
They have
is
parking
done,
stickers in cars, but, you know, we can't enforce that. He'd have to enforce that himself.
Right.
And I don't know how he can do that with his management staff.
Could city require him to? I mean, he agreed to that.
so until all the construction is done downtown, we're okay, and then we will probably want to redress this again, right? And
It'll be done next year. That second building will be done.
next year, meaning
Probably in the
January or December?
I don't know.
When?
Probably in the spring or summer.
So we could revisit this in the summer again to try to
It's the-
figure out how we're
it's
gonna
the-
cover the.
Who gets the parking
Force-
ticket money?
Well, at that point, we won't
Goes
have
into fines
the
and
resources to
forfeitures in the
add.
general fund.
Not for Terrence, though.
Well, you're not gonna have them anyhow.
No, we don't get that. We don't get Terrence's.
Of course, the purpose of parking enforcement or parking compliance is not to have fines, but just to have compliance. So we can't really rely on revenues to much of an extent. If we're successful, there won't be any parking fines to the extent we're successful.
Right, but somebody still has to go out and mark the tires.
Right.
presents.
Need to
If you're not
cover the
making
cost of it.
presents, it's gonna be ignored. And that takes time.
Is that called shooting yourself in the foot?
Victim of your own success.
Are we moving along?
I think so.
So,
Community services.
services is on page 111.
That's the decision item, so good.
The budget is, there's no decision items here.
All right.
You made Mark show up for no decision items.
Yeah, he did that all on his own. He didn't just have that added.
Thank you.
Budget is the last 5 or 6 years.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Hope to be able to keep it.
Chuck.
Police department is on page 85.
So,
Mark's my neighbor.
no decision item for you either?
Sort of.
So, I'm the guilty party, and we've discussed this quite a bit. To tell you that my staff brought up to me earlier in the year, it's time to do another assessment study, because it's not too worth the waste of time, there's a lot of economic worth the money to do it, because it's not going to be money there this year. We did it anyhow. Public Safety Committee wanted me to do it. And then we discussed strategies, and I discussed strategies with finance, with admin, with Public Safety Committee. And, I don't want to insult you by coming up here and asking for a sergeant and 2 new cops and a half-time position, which I did. I get where we're at, and I know that, that unless we win the lottery, that's not gonna happen. On the other hand, I think it's really important to know that we, have a third-party police expert look at 6 different performance objectives and 36 different variables from the policing field and say that we're short of cops and we need more cops. And so we need to do something about that. And it's either that we quit approving every housing, apartment, neighborhood, complex, or appeal that comes in here, or we somehow raise our revenues by some of the ways that Bill has, Bill and Melissa have mentioned. We've got to do one of those 2 things. We can't just keep adding apartments, especially high-density apartments, and not adding to our staff. And, I've got the data for the policing, but I know I speak for my fellow department heads and people that I work with, that it's not just the police department that's feeling the crunch. It's all departments. So I won't insult your intelligence by going over what our requests are.
I sent you a staffing study back in August. I'd be happy to discuss it with you individually, collectively. The person that wrote the staffing study is willing to do a video conference. But I would ask you to take a look at it and see that it's not just a wild guess on how many cops we need, but it's a scientific study based on a lot of different factors on the data that we collect all the time. So we are short of people, we're short of supervisors, and if there's any way that we can justify those, if we can come up with the money to get that, I sure would appreciate it because it's needed. As far as the non-personnel issues, it's really not too much. We have about a $5.5 million or $6 million budget. What I'm asking for is $2,000 more in office supplies, $2,000 more in our training account, $2,000 more in our other operating expenses, and our telephone bills are going up, so another $2,500 there. That's $8,500, but it's offset by our wage reimbursements. So when we have extra duty assignments, for instance, Capital Brewery's having an event, they're either required or police officers, we charge them for that. This year our budget's $25,000. We will exceed that. That's money that comes back in. We're estimating this next year will be $30,000. So that $8,500 is offset by that $5,000. That's about $3,500. Additional that we're asking for. Another account that we also have is our MPSIS budget, which is our collaborative work with Verona, Sun Prairie, Pittsburgh, Monona, and Middleton for our records management system. That operating budget is being reduced by $4,800. So totally, we're actually reducing the budget by a tad. Except for those darn personnel.
Chuck, I have a question.
Yes.
I know you have a whole lot of overtime. Is there, I guess what I'm trying to understand is, how can we decrease that amount? Or is there a way to do it? Another officer could help reduce that, but it wouldn't
Yeah.
fully
So
agree.
some overtime is just going to happen.
Yeah.
Late reports, court, significant incidents that happen, and we just need all hands on deck. And police officers are going to have to work those hours. There is a certain factor that would be reduced by having extra police officers. Frankly, one of the requests that we had for personnel was to promote a police officer to a sergeant, so we had more supervisory coverage. That would not only lessen our liability, but also lessen our sergeant overtime, because we mandate that supervisor be working from 3 p.m. to 7 a.m. We had an extra supervisor that would reduce that overtime. I can't give you a strict breakdown. Like if we added an additional officer, we could take $50,000 out of our overtime account, or $20,000. I don't have it broken down that much, but intuitively, if we had extra officers that were full strength, we would reduce our overtime. I think I've talked to you before about how difficult it is to maintain staffing in any police department. But you authorized a new position for the police department for 2018. We didn't stall on that one. That person was on board January 8th. We're still not at full staff yet. That person has been out of field training now, maybe for a month or two, and on solo patrol, but then we had somebody retire and another person resign. Those people have been brought in, their replacements, but we still have 2 officers on in field training, so they don't count as bodies out on the road. So to get to full strength is never an easy task, and we think we'll be there this fall. Something else
That's not wood.
In a cost recovery situation, Chuck, when you have all these demands for police to patrol this and that and cover this event and all the stuff that goes on around town seemingly every weekend and all the nights, do you completely recover your costs for all of those things?
Pretty much. And that has come from the License and Ordinance Committee. They set the table on that quite a while ago. The only thing that we don't completely recover costs on are community events. So Good Neighbor Festival, we basically charge half of our cost, and it's our total cost. High school events, football games, things like that. When it's another government entity or something, we don't necessarily charge the full load. But if it's especially like a bar or some type of event like that, we charge them, not only our overtime rate, but also all the additional costs. So it's expensive. If you want to hire a cop, it's about $60 an hour.
How much?
60.
60?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. Yeah, that's a formula that we came up with.
That typically includes overtime rate and then some wear and tear on equipment as well.
Do you have a flat rate for them, or do you rate the individual that you've got out there? I would assume,
Yeah,
I assume it costs a lot more than $60 an hour to have him stand out there than it
Oh,
would be a police
No,
officer.
and we take it, we tried to come up with an average of
Average?
entry-level police officer, PO3 sergeants.
Yep,
Because they're
okay.
typically the ones that do it. So it's an average. So
Okay.
yeah, sometimes we come out ahead, sometimes we don't.
Okay.
And I don't work those events.
Only as volunteer.
Right. So again, I'd be happy to discuss any of those personnel requests. It was not meant to insult you, and they have laid the table for us. We all know what we're facing. But I do think it's important that you know that not just the police department, but all departments are being stretched pretty thin by, Middleton is a destination now, not just for
Oh, yeah.
the number of people that live here, but businesses and restaurants and entertainment and so on. And that's a big difference from when I started here. We were a bedroom community, and we're not. People come in here to work, and people come in here to eat dinner and things like that. So there's a lot going on here.
Do you have a sense of what other jurisdictions are doing for their staffing needs?
Well, I know last year I did look at that, and I showed you how they had increased their staffing levels in the last 5 years and so on compared to us. And I didn't do that this year. But as far as how they're financing it and so on, I don't know. But
Right, the assumption is that they have the debt service, or the operating capacity to do that. Right, I can't imagine that we're the only municipality in this area that is bumping right up against the cap. And yet, I mean, so we've,
I think most departments, most communities that I've seen for the budget are bumping right up against their tax levy cap. I'm not aware of any community that has a significant gap between where their tax levy cap maximum is and where they are. Most are at that 100%.
right, so if my
Yeah.
memory
Mark?
serves, I think we've added, what, 2 police officers in the last 3 years?
well, in the last 5 years.
Last 5 years?
So we did that 5-year plan 5 years ago, and it called for an additional officer per year, so 5 total. And of that 5, there were.
We've only been able to do
5
2.
yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just know from experience working in Verona, there were a lot of pent-up needs there as well. I think they were able to trust several of them when the Epic TIF district closed, and they had some significant staffing that year to try to get caught up. But now they're not going to have that going forward, so I think they're going to be in a similar situation going forward.
I know Fitchburg's
Bill?
getting a lot more police officers, but they're incorporated in the town of Madison, so that is going to increase their population, but I don't know if that helps with their tax base or something.
Bill, would you comment on, I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago, I went to one of those meetings for financial officers for the whole big area. You were at that. And what I distinctly remember is communities very concerned about having to lay off police and fire and EMS because of the levy cap. So I don't think we're unique.
They're not
And-
there yet, but think what we're seeing is that.
Well,
Well,
we
I
don't
think
know
we're
if
gonna-
they're there yet, but they were really concerned about it.
And we're in a situation where we do have growth, so, that growth translates into service needs, but we have a 3% net new construction growth. There's a lot of places in the state that are at 1% or less, and they are looking at, how do they maintain without cutting staff, and a lot of them
Right.
are cutting staff. That's what the impact of
Yep.
levy limits over
Yeah,
time
northern
are gonna do.
Wisconsin is really hurting with,
I think the major difference for many of the other surrounding communities is that they took advantage of some things that we didn't prior to the levy cap. And, one of the things we've talked about before was the stormwater utility. And they had higher stormwater utility rates that they, most of them replaced garbage and recycling with a charge for service. And so when we compare our tax rates with those other communities, what you don't see is what they supplant with fees for service in those cases.
Yeah, but that's a
So you've
zero-sum
had
game, because.
No,
it's
no, it's
It's a
not.
zero-sum game, because if you were providing that service under the levy before, and you moved it to a fee-for-service, you were required to bring down the levy.
Now you are,
now you are,
No.
he's saying before that, if they built it in
When
before
they
they
did
had
it
an artificial
beforehand.
higher,
that most
Level than we
municipalities
did.
Pre
did that.
2010.
yeah.
Yeah.
Pre-2010.
Well, that's ancient history.
Sun Prairie,
Well-
Verona, et cetera.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, you asked why or
Oh.
how others are doing it, and that's in part how they're doing it.
Yeah, my hometown, that I grew up in, they did fees early on, so but they're a declining community, they had to do something.
Right. But we
Yeah, I
didn't
don't know how they,
because we were concerned about passing those costs on and not enabling taxpayers to take those as a deduction
And those,
for local and state taxes.
and those fees can be increased for inflation and expansion and so on without having to go to referendum. That's an important thing, too.
I would also point out that when we finally come back here with the negotiated wage settlement for the police officers and then, for the rest of the city employees, whatever that is, there's gonna be some sticker shock. But I think it's really important for us to remain competitive with other suburban communities and how we pay our police officers and certainly our other city employees. We have very little turnover. People like to work for the local police department for a variety of reasons, but one of them is because of the competitive wage. And if we don't keep up with that competitive wage, we're going to start losing people. And that's got a cost in and of itself, when you have to continually rehire and retrain or train people. There's a cost to that. So, Mike's trying to be very fiscally responsible in the negotiations, but, that's gonna be a sticker shock.
Well, I hope not.
Well, what's your definition of a sticker shock?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Planning is on page 151.
I can't count that high.
So in the planning department budget, we have two, changes or decision items that we're requesting. The larger one is a personnel request, and that is to take the sustainability coordinator from 20 hours a week to full-time position. The cost associated with that is $48,000. While we all fully understand the operating budget situation that we're in, we've gotten the word from finance, we view our role as to explain what the needs are in the community. And we have a lot of documented sustainability goals through the city's plan. We have a lot of requests from the sustainability committee and from residents related to prioritizing sustainability projects, and we aren't able to meet the needs currently. So that's where that request for additional hours comes in. the other decision item is related to additional training. We had 2 staff members give up their city cell phones, and that resulted in an operating budget savings of $1,100. And we're requesting approval to transfer that to our training budget. Since we have 3.5 employees now rather than 3, we would like to take advantage of additional training opportunities. And then in addition to that 1,100, led by our plan commission, we're also requesting an additional $1,900 in our training budget. So the total request is $3,000 in additional training. 1,100 of that can be offset by the cell phone line item.
Have you ever gotten any FOI requests for cell phone records?
What request?
Freedom
Freedom
of
of information.
information.
Oh, freedom of information? No.
And so if I were being persnickety and I wanted to know what your planning staff was doing on their cell phones, would you consider that an intrusion on their privacy if I requested their cell phone records?
No, I mean, it's understood by all of our city employees that anything you do on city equipment, whether it's a phone, a laptop, a tablet,
City equipment, we have a request for these individuals to move to their personal equipment, which is still subject to FOI if they're acting on behalf of the city. So my question to you before you go down this road again is, if this happens, everything on your cell phone is discoverable.
Right.
That's something that you're interested in.
I've never had a city cell phone. I've always used my personal cell phone.
Do you use it, but have you used this, your personal cell phone for city business?
Oh, yeah, she does all the time, yeah.
But Abby, are you sure you really want your personal cell phone records,
Discoverable.
discovered
I
on,
have no problem with it.
I have a problem with it for you then.
yeah.
I think most of us are in that position.
Yeah, there are a lot
There
of
are very
few of us
don't
that
have
have cell
city
phones.
cell
That's just kind of a requirement of the job, that you provide a cell phone that you can use for business purposes.
Okay, well, I have a major privacy issue with that, right? And I think the city should
But-
think about that.
Well, timeout. So what would happen, though, if you got an open records request for Abby's cell phones, she would print it off, Mike would look at it and take out all the personnel. So the only discoverable would be the ones that were city business.
Yeah,
So
we'd
you're
be
not
able-
going to see how many times she called her husband.
Well,
You're only
typically-
going to see the city business items.
Yeah, and typically what we have.
That's if
IT
he's
do-
responsible for.
He's the open records,
Right,
our supervisor, yeah.
right.
Custodian, yeah.
So what I do is, IT then will
Yeah.
take that device, or if it's an email, they'll go through our archived emails.
Yeah.
We ask for the request to be specific. If it's general, we don't have to provide everything that we've done. It has to be specific to an issue and dates, that kind of thing. And so then they give us that specific information. We'll go through the archived emails and provide that. And then we put that in a flash drive and then give it to the requester.
And is that,
We haven't had that done for cell phones, but I would imagine we do that in the same way.
and is that the same for lawsuits as well?
Yes.
So you're the gatekeeper for all of what's discoverable?
Yeah, well.
If I was a plaintiff, I'd have a problem with that, but
I and the city attorney, in that the city, well, if it is litigation, we'll have the city attorney go through those records too, to make sure that confidential attorney-client privilege records are taken out.
And I am the police department, I'm the custodian of records.
And that is spelled out in our insurance policy. So, all city employees know that if you're using your personal device, it is subject to open records requirements.
So how about, don't you delete a lot of that stuff? Or you save all of those things? I mean, after,
No, you don't really delete it. It's of
There.
record on your phone. You delete it for yourself, but it's still on the hard drive of the device, or whatever they call that for the cell phone.
Yeah, and most of what I do on my personal cell phone is email, so that's all saved in the server, and I think that's true of most people too.
It's all
Every once in a while I get a text from Howard Teal, but otherwise, me too.
I delete all those, though.
I send it, he never reads a single one of them. Since what, you what?
Yeah, we do have spam filters.
Do you? Well,
To bring Drew
I have my
back.
junk mail setting for Opitz, you know where that goes.
Well, most phone calls we're gonna make at our desk anyway.
That's not-
Those really aren't
Yeah.
discoverable, but a phone conversation, you can see right at the guy who
No,
calls.
it's more, this is more about texts.
Fairness, I think it's a fairness issue. Abby, since we're picking on you, do you take your own personal car when you have to run around town on city business?
I don't have a car, so no.
I think it's a part of the responsibility of the organization, the city, to provide for its staff the necessary equipment that it needs to do their job.
We do.
And phones and cars.
I came here 3 or 4 years ago and asked you for a sedan, and you provided it, and then I allocate that to staff on a reservation basis. And then we have SUV,
Just-
formerly from
I
the
just-
police department.
Just don't want, I'm
do.
I'm echoing what Mark is saying. I'm cautious, trying to figure out, is there anything that the employee is doing that they should be either reimbursed for, or they should have the equipment that's necessary to do it?
Yeah, if they use their own vehicle for city business, then they submit, department heads I'm speaking of in my case, they submit a sheet with all of the dates and times and mileage, and then I have to sign off on that before they get reimbursed by the finance department.
Super. I'm uncomfortable with an expectation when you go to work at a business that the first thing you do is use your own equipment to foster the business.
You know, ironically, that's the way the businesses are going, though. I know my son had to have his own cell phone.
I don't like that.
I know, I don't either, but
I
that's,
think it's inappropriate.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is then you should be funding and budgeting for more stuff.
Well, I have
Yeah.
some pictures of some stuff I saw
Yeah.
in Europe this summer that would submit to you that you might want to look at. They don't buy $30,000 cars.
Bicycles.
I'll show you.
But golf carts?
Pickles.
I'll show you
You
some.
can drive golf carts on city streets, just.
I'll show you. Get a four-wheeler.
He doesn't need it, he's
Really
got the
have.
Tesla from the parade.
Are we done with Abby?
No, I think, what's next?
Just for the record, that
That's
was
plenty.
Rob Conheim's.
I
Tesla.
heard you the first time.
That was good.
I know you're envious of that.
Yeah,
The electric vehicle, I know you wanted.
yes.
Did you,
Yes.
Okay.
So CDA is 186.
And on the CBA, increase proposed $1,500 in the downtown marketing assistance, and that is from the CBA's budget, which is separate from the general fund. There's been
Thanks, Chuck.
tremendous use of that, and we've had some incredible events downtown. Also proposing to increase the CBA event sponsorship by $2,500, and again, tremendous cost for those activities. We're also proposing to put in a line item of $5,000 in miscellaneous funds. Oftentimes, the CBA has to put in some wayfinding signs or signs for the parking lots that we control. So it's for that, it's recognizing the expenses that we had. Because of our budget, we have about, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, about $700,000 in funds from leftover from the CBA from the past however many years since it's been funded by TIF. But as a recognition of all the things that TIF does, the proposal, the decision item for revenue is to transfer $65,000 from TIF 3 into the CBA budget to help support the things that are happening downtown, potential future maintenance of the public plaza, landscaping that's being done now, and maintenance on that landscaping. We also are responsible right now for snow removal from the CBA. So those are the decision items. Increasing three decision items on the expense side,
What's the rationale? What's the TIF-related nexus?
The CDA is responsible for the areas that are redevelopment district. Downtown is redevelopment district number 1. It's the most active redevelopment district, and there's a lot that's happening. CDA is responsible, you guys again, Adam, correct me if I'm saying anything that's not true. Responsible for ensuring that the investment downtown and the businesses downtown are given sufficient attention and creating excitement.
But how is this related to TIF 3?
Well, we have a pretty big investment in from TIF 3 into the downtown, both the first phase of the second phase of the redevelopment down in Cayuga, and then also Middleton Center. So it's helping to understand that there's a lot of TIF investment here and just trying to keep it vibrant. And
There are a lot of goals in the TIF 3 project plan related to like downtown revitalization, downtown redevelopment. And I think, our concern is the CDA right now is operating at a deficit of about $65,000 per year. And if you look at revenues that the CDA is taking in, we own the building that the senior center is operating out of. And there are 2 lease spaces within that building, and that's the primary source of revenue for the CDA. One of them is the Hubbard Activity Center, so the recreation department pays the CDA for use of the space. The other is the Edward Jones rental space. The CDA doesn't receive any revenue related to operations of the senior center within the CDA building. And I think if you add up, there are 5 line items within the CDA's operating expense. Downtown snow removal, senior center building maintenance, banners and holiday lights, the LTE that we have doing needs in the downtown and maintaining the plantings, and then the downtown landscape and maintenance line item. Those items, which is a majority of the budget that the CDA has, total $68,500, and I think one could make an argument that some of those could fall more into the general operating budget. And so I think the goal with the transfer from TIF 3 to the CDA is to allow the CDA to operate on a balanced budget each year rather than operating in a deficit.
So what happens when the TIF is gone?
Well, one of the ideas that we've discussed, and I know it's pretty common in other communities, is for, during the last year of TIF expenditure period, to make a donation of funds to the CDA, and that would allow for us to have additional funding in the CDA fund and hopefully be able to operate with some interest income. And that was actually how the CDA was funded originally.
So what you're recommending then is that we would fund the CDA to the detriment of all the other taxpayers in the city, right? When that TIF closes, we're saying that the CDA is more important than the
only-
rest of the citizens for tax relief.
It's only the
that's the
city's
thing.
portion though, right? You're not talking about the TIF proceeds across the board. It's the city's portion of those proceeds.
We would be talking about a very small percentage of the TIF increment that is going to be available when the TIF closes. I mean, we're
Right, but don't you have to do the formula before you can decide what the expenditures are from that distribution?
I think the concept is if this is a TIF eligible expense, and I believe that there is information for that and other communities have done that, that you could as a TIF expense make the donation to the CDA before you do the allocation of the
Before you
funds by
close it out?
taxing jurisdiction. And I think the CDA was originally established with the proceeds, there was a land sale, and then that sale proceeds was donated to the CDA to establish the CDA. So it would be doing a similar concept.
So Mark's point is well taken, that it is to the detriment of the others. But you'd have to make the case that the revenue generated by a healthy downtown supports those tax districts ongoing.
So my argument would be, why don't you charge the merchants downtown who are directly benefiting from this? Why don't you charge them the maintenance for these items?
They would
Right.
say they pay taxes already.
Well, then we should just do away with what we're doing, because it's obviously not paying taxes. It comes back to, we want the general fund, but we also want user fees. This is clearly something that's a user fee for the merchants downtown, right? I don't derive benefit from a planter down here.
Well, actually, I would argue that a strong downtown makes for a strong community.
Then you should charge the residents or the businesses down here for that upkeep.
I think the businesses that are downtown are primarily locally owned businesses.
What's that? I'm locally owned citizen. I have a locally owned house. What does that got to do with anything?
The downtown benefits the whole community, not just the downtown district.
If it's a cost that you don't want to share with the entire city, then the businesses downtown should be paying for it.
Well, I think we'd all like it to be on the general fund if possible, but I don't think that's possible. One of the things we're looking at, one of the things we've done since the CDA was created in 1997 was try to use those funds wisely to create activity in the redevelopment district, to foster more redevelopment, foster more investment, and I think if we look at the numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but I think we can argue that it has worked.
Well, your basic planning 101 is that without a strong downtown, you won't have a strong community. A donut hole community, downtowns that aren't successful are a drain on the rest of the community.
I'm not arguing about the success or lack of success downtown. What we're saying is that there's a cost here that is not being borne by the taxpayers because we're playing these games to get it into CDA. If these services are so much needed, then they should be on the general fund, or they should be a user fee to the businesses downtown. Stop playing the games with the CDA. Stop playing games everywhere here. Right? That's part of the issue, is that we keep getting into these, let's move the funding source somewhere else, and then we get trapped in these games that we can't sustain.
Just wanted to add that we've been over how constrained we are in the general fund and with levy limits. I think what the staff is trying to do is find alternatives for you to consider with alternative revenues or way to shift costs. You can call them games, but we have this reality. We're very constrained. I think it's our job as staff to present options for you. You obviously can make the choice. If this isn't an option you want to follow, that's fine. We'll follow your direction, but we feel like it's our role to present these options to you.
I think at a certain level, these things need to be principled and reasoned, and I'm not seeing that when we start shifting these costs to places that have no business bearing them, those costs.
Well, for instance, because the CDA owns the senior center building, we're responsible for maintenance, so we have a line item for maintenance.
The
That's
CDA is responsible, right? And if they can't collect enough in revenue to cover that,
from the senior center, because they're the major tenant in that building. And we paid for, I think, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I think the CDA paid for a new roof for the senior center.
but it was the
That
CDA's
otherwise-
building.
But that otherwise would have been.
CDA is not charging
on
rent.
the general fund. So you can say play games, but the CDA is trying to recognize, okay, they're responsible for that, but they don't have a funding source.
Okay, so what is the appropriate rent for that space?
Well, I think we're charging Edward Jones about $18.50 per square foot.
And what are we charging the senior center?
Zero.
Maybe that's part of the problem, is that we're not recognizing all of the costs involved in running the city. And so we get into these predicaments where you keep running into these brick walls because we've played these games in the past. The reality is, if the market rate for rent for that space is $18.50 a foot, then that's what the city should be paying the CDA.
Mark, if the reality was we didn't have a tax limit that the state imposes on us because they don't trust local government, this would be a different discussion. But that's not the reality we are in. So this is what we have to do in order to make our dollar stretch wherever we can. So, we don't have to be lectured about that. We're under artificial constraints that we didn't choose, and this is the best that we're doing under those conditions. So,
The other point
CDA had an exercise where we went through line by line, all of the requirements by state statute, and we're meeting all of the state requirements. And also, I think what I've learned through WEDC and through the Main Street program is the activities that we're funding in the downtown are quite similar to the way that other communities are using their community development authority. So we're not doing anything that's in any way different from what other communities are doing.
Except that we deprived it of a funding source because of the subsidized rent. You know what? Just move on.
Eileen, while I got you up here, I got a question. Across the street from Eyesight, who's building on Johnson's lot over there?
The old building.
Johnson's property.
Oh, Kent Johnson's property?
Kent Johnson.
Oh, okay, on Pleasant.
Yeah.
Down by Kelly.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a plan approved for that site. I think he's just moving dirt on it. He wants to develop it eventually, but he hasn't brought it.
Oh, so there's nobody going in there? Because he's moving
I
dirt
know, I
today
think
like
he's
a
got-
bandit.
I think he's got a land grading permit from what I understand, but he doesn't have a building plan approved.
And
Oh.
Fitzgerald's just redid their parking lot. Why was that? Yeah,
That is unusual, because they're not open.
what? Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I
Maybe they're
didn't
trying
know
to
that
sell it.
part. I did know that Ken Johnson was, I heard today that he was moving dirt. So that he was putting it there.
Yeah, he's just,
But there's no
that's a
plan.
big lot. He's got
There's no
flat,
plan.
no.
Like, I don't like it. I was thinking high site, I meant
Oh.
the new high site. That's
Oh,
why
the
I
new
was
high
thinking
site, no, I know.
the new high site. We got two high sites.
New high site. Eyesight A and B.
High site A and B. High site old and new.
What page is our next one?
Do you want to do transit next?
Sure.
Sure, Mark's here.
Okay, it's on 148.
On the last page, you'll see what Metro Transit gives us as their calculation of our annual investment in Metro service. They are projecting $415,999. We are, previously had budgeted $424,291 for this year. Carrying over that as the base amount, coupled with the Headlight Transit Committee's recommendation to initiate Sunday bus service, resulted in a decision item of $41,578, including paratransit service. So paratransit service, as you may know, cannot be offered in the city unless there's fixed route service provided as well. So it's all or nothing. If we want transit service on Sundays, we need to offer the basic fixed route service, which is our Route 78. Metro is planning to, if we move ahead with this, and even if we're not, Saturday service, they're planning to restructure our service so that it's no longer oriented to the west transfer point on Saturdays. They want to interline it with Route 8, which would provide a more direct service to campus and downtown Madison. Regardless of whether we go ahead with Sunday service, I think that's something Metro is wanting to proceed with.
So Mark, let me just understand what you said about the paratransit. So paratransit is not available on Sunday. It's available the other 6 days of the week, though? Okay.
It's available whenever we offer free
Okay.
service. But there's been now for about 10 years, we've offered Saturday service without Sunday service. We are one of the only parts of the metro area that does not offer Sunday service. Headlight Transit Committee is recommending that we change that and offer Sunday service comparable to Saturday service. Maybe even a couple of minutes less in the morning, but basically Sunday service. The other decision item is the payment to the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Pittsburgh, Manoa, McFarland, and then of course Madison all contribute to the operation of the MPO. As you probably know, I represent small cities and villages thanks to the mayor's support and his predecessor's support. I'm one of the representatives of the small cities and villages on the Metropolitan Planning Organization's policy board. And I have heard several times their pitch
So I don't remember that being a decision item. Bill, do you remember, how did that happen?
That was one of the options that came out in the scenarios when we were looking to try to find additional dollars.
Okay.
It's not a mandatory
So it
payment.
wasn't a decision item up front, it was one that we chose after a scenario was presented?
Correct.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Airport.
Hey, Mr. Opitz? Opitz, would you introduce distinguished guest? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
Who is our airport manager, who's here the night before. And he's here to respond to any technical. A number of decision items, like 7 in the operation. The first one is for outside services. This is primarily the line item used, this is the line item I used for our city attorney. Any consulting we do outside of City Hall with the attorney regarding legal agreements. You have noticed for several years now, a fairly consistent expenditure beyond what you budgeted. And so this decision item is intended to reflect that, that pattern that we've established for several years, $6,000. Ground maintenance, as we've been experiencing with older equipment at the airport, increasingly there's increased cost to maintain aging equipment. So we are, again, based on invoices that we've been paying every year, we've noticed that we've been going beyond the budget. So hence the request for a $10,000 increase in this line item. Which is in the head of that, answer any questions if there's any.
We are on track to be replacing some of this equipment again with federal grant monies. It's called basically our insurance entitlement fund, excuse me, which as long as we have an approved program for the project ongoing, we get about $150,000 a year from federal funds. This comes directly from fuel taxes on airlines and general aviation aircraft. So this is not something outside of the city budget line, essentially. The airport fund is segregated, all of the funds that are generated on the airport, other than tax revenues, have to stay on the airport. So we are in that process. We're in the process of paying off the snow removal equipment building that was done completed a couple of years ago. But at the moment, we're running equipment. The main bit of equipment is at least 10 years old. We also have used snow plows that do require some maintenance as well. So we are seeing aged equipment that does require a little bit more.
The utilities, the airport manager has proposed, and Mike and I agree with this approach, that the city should be, we have half of the hangar building, the terminal building. That public portion of the terminal building, the city share, heating, cooling, and insurance for that portion of the building amounts to $7,000. So we feel that that should be itemized in the budget in the future going forward. That's how it should have been in the past. Landing lights, again, increased cost to maintain aging equipment. Unfortunately, quite a few of them were damaged during the flood. As I understand, I don't know when landing lights have come down.
The specialized equipment, the runway end identifier lights, which are strobes, the precision approach indicator lights, which give you a glide path. They're all inundated. They're essentially 3/4 now. Also, we have part of the weather reporting system was flooded. There's working with the insurance company on that. Could be some additional costs involved with that as well.
We have a line item for hangar engineering that we have not been using in recent years, and so we are recommending a decrease of $25,000, the full amount to that. additional one, would use to use for mowing and, ancillary,
Essentially, right now, we're using a plow truck, pickup truck, that is owned by Moore Airplane Company and leased to the city for that. That is a very inefficient way of moving snow in a parking lot. With this type of equipment, it should be good for a good 15 years. It'll be able to be a lot more efficient. It should keep the operating expenses of the and an investment like this will I think, pay for itself over probably 10 years. Certainly pay for itself.
And I would add to that, with the tractor required, there is a very strong chance that the ground maintenance line item will decrease. That's what we are.
So seal coat is for the runway?
I'm sorry?
Seal coating, that's for the runway, right? Or
Yeah, the seal coat was actually for the ramp area. The runway was done a couple of years ago. We should have done the ramp at the time, but we didn't have the funding available at that time in our budget. We've been trying ever since to get that done with the state, but we are at the state's mercy and the federal government, Federal Aviation Administration's mercy as to whether they would approve that project or not. And for whatever reason, it did not get in the approved projects last year. I don't know the details of that, other than there was a retirement of someone who was in charge of that, and some areas apparently just didn't get submitted properly or in time.
okay, thank you.
So, Bill, are you presenting this on a GAAP basis or on a cash basis?
We really have it presented two different ways. We do have the capital shown for budgetary purposes, but we've also done a summary sheet that shows that on the full accrual basis. The summary sheet is on page 239.
Well, Mark is pondering his next question. Rich, how many takeoffs and landings did we have last year?
Well, Howard, I should have that in the top of my head, and I don't. The state has a number, and I hesitate to guess at it because it's very high. I'd like to be accurate.
Where do we rank?
We're very active as an airport, not only through the flight school activities of both flight schools that are operating, but we have a very active corporate business, aircraft in and out, basically all day, and often all evening. It's amazing the number of aircraft in and out.
So the airport and its operations is an essential part of the city.
I feel it's a great benefit, it's an economic lever for the entire western Dane County, as well as especially Middleton.
Howard, I would add that, I went through the data that's in some aviation database, I can't remember the name of it, so I don't know what it is, but the number of based aircraft, the number of based aircraft, we are the 8th largest number of aircraft based at the airport, that's what I'm trying to say, in the state, the 8th largest. 90 is what the count was about a year ago. Madison, for comparison, has 108. So we are, if we had more land available, we would surpass Madison. Yeah, we have more aircraft based here than several airports that have commercial service. Across. So there are a couple of pretty clear, yeah. Well, I doubt we have more in Green Bay, but the point is we are a very actively used and desirable airport because of our position in the Madison metro area and our booming economy. And we have a master plan underway that is assessing needs, future needs at the airport. Survey that's underway to gauge those needs.
Next.
Public Works on 123?
What about sustainability in TIF districts? We're not
We
doing
did
them?
sustainability, what, TIF?
Sustainability, I think, was addressed.
Yeah, we got that, yeah. That was
Oh.
only the position, right? There's nothing else? And then TIF, did you have anything for TIF?
Oh, I didn't have anything prepared. I think we might want to do that at our meeting on the 27th. We can
Okay.
go through the TIF projections. I think that'd be more useful.
Okay, so Public Works.
A lot of the TIF was capital, but we can follow up at the next meeting.
Okay.
Good evening.
Hey, Dave.
Hello.
Maybe we can circumvent this a little bit. Water and sewer. You have these captured in either in fund balance or in your pending rate cases.
Correct.
Water's on page 223 for the decision items. And sewer is 228.
I don't have any questions.
That was brief. You might win an award for that. We're all set?
Shortest discussion by a division manager.
John, can you make yours that quick?
I think I can. I don't think I could set a record, but.
Thank you.
Doing stormwater.
I'll address that.
Got lots of it.
Yeah. We're back to about normal.
So now, what do you want to start with Public Works then?
Or if you want to talk about
Stormwater?
stormwater.
Okay,
stormwater. I'd ordinarily have Gary here, but his car engine broke.
Oh, no.
So he's, in addition to trying to keep up with FEMA paperwork, trying to get a car fixed.
There really shouldn't be any operating expenses here, right? It's all capital.
There was one decision item for water resources.
Oh, stormwater utility.
What page is that?
Stormwater utility, no.
Thank you. Okay, water resources.
Oh, there, okay. Okay. Going back to Public Works.
Yeah, it's,
I'm not trying to make you dizzy on the screen.
right, don't look at the
Water
screen.
resources, the one decision item is on page 131.
And to that $1,641 decision item, we're looking at adding $2,000 by eliminating from the capital budget the city's participation in the LEAF study. But that's it for water resources. The rest of Public Works has sort of a slew of decision items, but in terms of some of the shorter versions of some of the bigger elements, there are two personnel requests. One is related to streets, a request to hire on a seasonal basis 2 work release employees through the prison system that could potentially reduce our reliance on calling in contractors for certain things, in essence, to bring in-house some of what we've historically called other folks in for. And that's out to about 13,800 in round numbers. The other is a request for a full-time service tech in the mechanic shop in lieu of an LTE, which was maddeningly difficult to find. And that cost is about 65,200 minus the 10.8 that we've already got in, so it's 54.5 net-ish, I'll say, in that scope. And then the other one's not really a personnel thing as much as a contracted service for hiring snow removal of several downtown properties that has been covered by the CDA for several years. And this would bring it back into the city's budget instead of CDA budget, and that's $16,000.
So did you tell that to Eileen then? So it should get out of the CDA budget then, right?
I actually have been talking about this with Mike more than
And
Eileen.
I told Eileen and
Okay.
Sean that, Eileen and Abby that Sean had put this in.
Okay, so there it was budgeted for 25, so you think you can do,
The
you can do?
difference being that the CDA owns properties that aren't included in this number. The CDA owns properties are the parking lot at the fire department, owned by the city, and the parking lot by the Quarry Park,
By the skateboard park
by the
there.
skateboard park.
Okay, all right.
And that wouldn't be coming into the city's budget, just the
Okay.
downtown properties that have sidewalks. Some of the other items of note, just as a broad overview, are increased training. That's a big part of what we heard from employees during evaluations. And so there was $1,000 in the engineering admin and $500 for street crew, increases in training. For us, it was more professional development in engineering admin. For the street crew, it was more on a focus of safety and equipment training. The MOC, you've probably noticed, has utility bills that have been coming in lower than anticipated. There was an early estimate that hasn't panned out. And so with a few years of history, I think we're reasonable in lowering that utility budget. There has been some increase in maintenance, though. The ceiling fans in the vehicle storage area, the gate system. Have been, unfortunately, requiring some maintenance. So we've been somewhat under budgeted in that line. For street signs and pavement markings, we almost always run over budget, and we have more requests than we satisfy. I'm sure you hear from residents who want us to put up more signs and more paint. We're already over budget. This would essentially just get us back to breaking even in that line item. And then there's a handful of relatively small ones.
Any questions for Sean? Thank you. Run while you can.
See you, Sean.
Parks and Conservancy, and Recreation. Good evening. Welcome opportunity to be doing something besides FEMA. We've got two major items that I want to talk about, questions by which are mostly reductions right now. To start with, Rhode Island Parks, we've got a request that was discussed in the capital presentation about purchasing 2 more trucks in an effort to shift mowing operations to LTE staff, full-time staff, to do more project-based work and more work appropriate to their skill and experience level. So there's a partner request here from an operating standpoint to add LTE hours to make that a reality. So we feel that, or I feel that is a significant step forward in us being more proactive instead of reactive with our maintenance and allowing us to better serve some of the growing demands of the park system in terms of upkeeping maintenance and freeing guys up to be changing the mowing out sometimes 3 or 4 days a week during the active season. There's also a additional request in Conservancy Lands for $5,000 more for trail maintenance. The last couple of years, we have had to stop trail maintenance as one of the items in light of the recent flood. I think this is a highlighted area where these are for natural trails. This is where our washouts occur. It's funding to keep trails accessible and open year-round. The bulk of the rest of our requests are from recreation, and I'll turn over to Rebecca to highlight those.
Recreation starts on page 142. The decision items are on 145. Briefly summarize some things I think it would be helpful to realize with the new payroll system that we have. We have been able to better track which cost centers some of our pool staff primarily are coming out of. So you'll see many of the things that we're requesting on here are just actually adjustments to line up with the appropriate areas and gives us a better idea of what we're spending in the specific areas. Our biggest request probably off the bat is to take our current rec assistant / youth center assistant director and bring him up to 40 hours a week to give him 10 more hours on the recreation side of the house. So that is our biggest request, and you'll see that the first few things are related to moving him to that. The other thing that we've asked for the last few years is to move position grades with that position. That position requires a 4-year degree. When we hired our current recreation coordinator as a recreation assistant, he came in at grade 4. John Hunter, as the assistant youth center director, is at grade 2, which is equivalent to the beverage cart attendant at the golf course. And again, he requires a 4-year degree for his position and supervises children, amongst others, a lot throughout the year. So you'll see that that's related. Probably our other big request is kind of printing and advertising. We've gone to that hard copy brochure. We're finding that to be very effective for us. But we have found that the cost of printing has definitely gone up the last couple of years, and we are not currently doing all of the City of Middleton mail routes just because we've been trying to live within our means. So if we include that for the 3 mail We're looking at an increase in that seasonal wages, but we also think it's due in part to that better tracking and really getting them to be able to punch in and out via the app, and it's really kind of getting it right down to the minute. So that would be a slight increase, but it's reflective of the things that we are doing. Same with our supplies and materials. Our outside services, again, just reflective of us now running more leagues and having to hire outside officials for the different programs that we do. The next few that we have here is really what I was talking about with that new payroll system, that we were really able to separate out our concession staff, our swimming lesson instructor staff, and our lifeguard staff. And we have a big decrease in that overall seasonal wage line. It's because when you look at that, you get the printout from Cassell, we actually have a much higher increase in the swimming lessons. We've had it there, but it's always gone back in to the same place. It didn't track as well. We just put in an overall number of hours. Now that the guards punch in and out from their smartphones and they pick the category, it's just giving us a better reflection of what we're actually doing out there.
If I could just jump in for a second, if you take all those lines together, it's a net reduction of $344. So all of those kind of combined together, that's what that result is.
And then some of our pieces are just decreases. We've combined a couple of the areas. We have office supplies and supplies listed under the pool budget. We don't need two separate pieces. We're not spending that much in the two separate pieces. We can take that down. Our outside services, once again, we brought the mowing back in-house, and that has definitely taken our outside service costs down amongst other things. So looking for some decreases related to that. I think that's all the pieces that we have on that.
Before you go to the youth center, there were two slides I put together for Park Rec and Forestry Commission when I presented the budget. I'll quickly highlight this. Looking at recreation programming overall, in 2015, rec programming lost $8,169, not including full-time staff. In 2017, our actual the revenue generated was a little over $33,000. So it's a significant change over a 4-year period of time. Both this year and next year project right around the $36,000 in additional revenue over the cost of running the program. So as a lot of rec professionals know, when you sharpen the pencil and add programming and make programming available to the communities looking for run effectively and efficiently, as Rebecca and staff have done, you can make money doing that program. The other thing I wanted to point out is in regards to the Aquatic Center, in 2015, the Aquatic Center lost almost $73,000 in its operation, not including full-time staff costs. Last year, it lost just under $29,000. So you saw about a $40,000 difference over that 3-4 year period of time. This year's projected numbers that are in the budget show a loss of about $26,000 in operating the pool, not including Rebecca's time in overseeing it. So you're seeing some good trends there in terms of reducing expenses and increasing revenue, both at the Aquatic Center and in rec program.
Our budget set up, though, we have two cost centers. So now I have the Hubbard Activity Center that's separated out as a separate piece with respect to everything. And again, our only pieces over there are really related to accurately being able to reflect wages. And so that increase, which was probably coming out of rec wages before, is actually Hubbard Activity. We've tracked it separately, trying to make sure that what we're bringing in over there is what we're expending. We're going to take the janitorial services off of there. We talked to the CDA about some things, and kind of utilizing money that is set aside for some of the bridge maintenance to be able to do some of the pieces in that space. Question for the Hubbard Activity Center. And then our last cost center besides all of these are the youth centers. I don't know if you want to pick over the youth center. have been every single year. So the amount of food that we are serving to students, think about this, 10 to 20 extra students per day, 5 days a week. We are blowing through our nutritional budget really fast. We need to move that up. And I know that there's been question in the past as to why do we need to do that? Our students who are there, 75% of our students are reporting, self-reporting being of low socioeconomic status, amongst other things. Many of them go home and do not get a good meal until they go back to school the next day. We need to give them a snack. So we really need to look at that piece, and we've been creative. We're working with the school district. We actually now have buying power through the school district, which is saving John and Gabrielle some time. They're ordering through food service and having it delivered to Park Street as part of the process. So they get a little bit better rate, but we still need a little bit more money just to serve that basic snack every day with the students. The other piece we're looking at is that we're trying to keep track of how much we're utilizing to do the fundraising. The Commission on Youth is the group that's been putting things together, but utilizing materials, we want to track that separately. It took about $300 based on the mailing, the paper, the envelopes. They tracked everything else. We want to list that out separately as part of the budget process too. So I don't know if you have specific questions, but those are our decision items.
What percentage of the students are actually residents of the city of Middleton, since anyone in the school district has come?
Correct. Pretty much. All of the students who use the youth center during the school year, all of them go to Cromery. All of them.
Okay.
So if you attend Cromery, you typically live within the city limits.
Yeah.
The students during the course of the summer that come in from different places that are bused in, many of those go to Glacier Creek during the school year, and they can go to the youth center. The school district says that we have to have that available to them. However, they have to get themselves from Glacier Creek to the youth center in some way, shape, or fashion.
It's also important to note that with Rebecca and Gabrielle's help, the school district's working with Cross Plains and Glacier Creek in developing a similar program for Glacier Creek students.
Okay.
I don't know how that would work in the summer, but there may be a reduction of some of the outside of the city kids being involved.
Yeah, so currently during the school year, it's primarily all city
Okay,
residents. We're getting
that's
a lot
good.
of students who live over at Pew and Century in that general vicinity. And then also just around the View Park area.
So Rebecca, did you say about 70% are low income or
75.
75? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything for forestry?
What's that?
Was there anything for forestry?
No decision items for the first.
Okay.
Great, they're cutting trees, we won't have any forest.
Well, now classified.
Saw the pile out at the soccer field.
It's either impressive or sad.
Not impressive.
Rebecca, for the outside fundraising for the youth center, how many were community groups?
Are we done?
Other than Kiwanis? Did Optimus give money?
We account for that separately.
Oh, okay.
So Kiwanis usually
I have a question. I'm logged on to city.
Yeah,
in the past year.
right.
Most of the donations.
Yeah, I'm logged
I
into
get,
it right now.
I get logged out about every half hour.
Families.
So they did a.
Yeah.
May have a timer on it.
They,
We'll see.
sent out a letter to all current and past users that she had addresses,
Okay.
contact information
Yeah.
for, and asked if anyone could donate a couple of, we have some very well off families that go on the center.
And
Some of them donated that
most of-
$500 a family,
Oh.
towards that.
Going to.
And then just different pieces here and there that they were able to come up with.
Let's see.
They are looking at trying to focus a little bit more on affluent and businesses.
Yeah.
And that was really not a focus of what they did when they did our campaign.
Thanks.
So next
I'll log on.
Wednesday? Is that-
Next,
I've been logged on
next
for about,
week, we
2
don't
hours.
have a budget meeting, so the next one would be the 27th, which is a Thursday.
Thought we had another capital meeting, or is that all combined in that last 27th?
Can't all be there.
27th is the rest of the department, operating departments, and then capital for fire and health.
Okay. Does anybody have any requests for staff?
Yeah, Mike. Normally, Mr. Opitz comes paired with a ridership analysis sometime in the early fall. How many people are riding what, so we know what's going on. Always interested in that because on occasion, empty bus go by. Let's see some statistics.
Okay, you know, he was just here a few minutes ago.
I know. I let him get out before I
I'd like
hung
to
up.
add to my workload, right?
I can send him a message.
No, I'll take it.
You're the guy that calls the shots, so.
When we give them the bullets, yes.
We what?
When we give them the bullets.
Nope, I don't have any requests.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yep.
We are adjourned.